Allow pa, dear friends. Allow pa. Such beautiful, noble sentiments we just heard from the video, so uplifting. Okay, this is better, huh? Yeah. I asked if I needed a footstool. They said no. I said, okay. Short women problems. But it's a pleasure for me to be here with you today. I'd like to explore some ideas today, this morning, that are essential to Baha'i-inspired educational programs concerned with moral empowerment. Programs that enable young people to take charge of their own intellectual and spiritual growth, as well as to contribute to the transformation of society. Of course, such a transformation is the movement towards a divinely inspired civilization, world-embracing in its scope and fundamentally spiritual. It's a civilization that we know is characterized by justice, unity, peace, and true prosperity. But maybe let us begin by reflecting a little bit about the nature of the time in which we live in and some of the challenges that are particular to it. So we're all aware that society is in a stage of transition, and the magnitude of such a transition is greater than in any other time in human history. Everywhere we look, we can see the inadequacy of social, economic, and political systems to address the needs of the masses. People whose suffering is increasing as outdated modes of thought and inadequate social structures are repurposed and reapplied time and time again with dogmatic allegiance. The challenge of creating a global society characterized by peace and justice requires a vision. And a proper vision will never take shape if the entire spiritual heritage of the human race continues to be neglected. So while the Enlightenment period made a tremendous contribution to human understanding and to civilization, it removed the veils of superstition that had chained human reason and also blinded imagination, it also at the same time formed and developed a kind of ideology and philosophy that denied the powers of the human spirit, of love and noble deeds. Scientific knowledge has liberated us from the fetters of religion ruled by superstition, but it has also demonstrated how it can lose its bearings if it falls victim to materialism. So the power that can ultimately raise humanity out of its present condition is the power of knowledge, a knowledge that is created and recreated on the basis of a sound understanding of our true self, of those promptings that lead to abasement and those that lead to dignity and honor. A sound understanding that we are noble beings and a vision of progress that unites the spiritual with the material draws on two repositories of knowledge, religion and science. With their aid, we discover in ourselves the powers of the human spirit and learn to apply these powers to the building of an ever-advancing civilization. Belief in its inherent nobility can equip humanity to respond to the demands of this crucial historical moment. So with this context in mind, maybe we can then examine some ideas that are essential to the kind of education that helps humanity express this God-given nobility. So our conception of moral empowerment rests on two interrelated and foundational principles: the oneness of humankind and the evolution of human society. We know that the oneness of humankind is a central principle of the faith, and it's the pivot around which all its teachings revolve. It, according to The Guardian, calls for a complete reconceptualization of the relationships that sustain society, and it involves, he says, an organic change in the structures of present-day society, a change such as the world has not yet experienced. This organic change, we know, does not come about suddenly, and it can be best understood as stages similar to the life phases of a human being: infancy, childhood, adolescence, maturity. So the forces operating in the world today, then, are associated with parallel processes of disintegration that sweep away the barriers that block humanity's progress, opening space for the progress of integration, as new opportunities for collaboration and cooperation appear. So, that humanity is evolving and coming to terms with its oneness does not mean that it's easy. No matter how common sense it may feel for us to say or to think that I'm a world citizen or I'm a global citizen. And this struggle to come to terms with our true identity impacts our work with young people in profound ways. Consider, for example, the conversation a young person needs to navigate in order to understand who they are, where they belong, and what their purpose in this world is. Education seems to focus more on helping people identify all the ways in which they are different, in the ways that we think, in the ways that we live, in the ways that we act. And in this terrain of plural identities, a young person seems to have to choose, to identify. I remember an animator sharing with me a story that during one of the junior youth camps they were holding in their cluster, groups from different parts of the city had come together to participate in this one camp, which brought a great deal of diversity to their time together. A few days in, though, however, some of the groups from the less affluent parts of town arrived at the camp one day wearing the same color bandana over their heads. And this looked particularly strange because none of these youth wear bandanas, nevertheless bandanas of the same color. But you kind of had a sense of what had happened. Somewhere along the way, possibly in conversation, possibly in interaction with others, a kind of identity had formed that they felt they needed to express. And the animator was wise enough to recognize that this act held greater significance. And instead of turning a blind eye and ignoring it, she reminded them of their true identity, that allegiance to these lesser commonalities must be considered in a greater context, that of our oneness. So, while this example is small, the House of Justice have told us that humanity is gripped in a crisis of identity, of human identity. And this is because of a lack of a shared identity and common purpose that follows from a recognition of the oneness of humanity. Today, it almost feels like there's a refusal to offer a vision of collectivity, one that is not premised on individual particularities and desires. For young people in particular, without a common identity, they can become victim to competing ideologies and power struggles. They are recruited to join the ranks of the many who believe that if the poor struggle against the rich, the uneducated against the educated, the meek against the powerful, equality and justice will come about. And while some struggle cannot be avoided, once you get used to the ways of conflict, you can lose sight of unity. After all, how can we build peace with others if we are constantly focused on just our differences? So it seems then that moral education for young people requires a clear and explicit purpose, a purpose that's shaped by humanity's oneness and the evolution of human society, the path that society is treading to reach that oneness, the expression of that principle of the faith. Education, then, must empower the individual not only to develop the qualities and capacities needed to flourish in a world standing at the threshold of its maturity, and at the same time, it needs to help individuals participate in bringing about organic structural changes to our civilization, to our world. So such a twofold moral purpose of both personal transformation and social transformation implies that on a personal level, we're imbued with new virtues and powers, new moralities and capacities. And as society advances, our understanding, meaning, and application of these spiritual qualities changes. They don't remain constant over time. For those of you who are parents in this room, this may seem to be a plain and simple fact for you. So for example, the expression of the spiritual quality of generosity is the depth of understanding of that quality, the things that test a person to be generous, is quite different than when you are 5 years old compared to when you are 15 years old. So the expression of this spiritual quality of generosity over the life stages of a child, from quite young to adolescence, looks different. Just as how in society, the advancement of human civilization and its ability to express these virtues and powers will look different depending on the historical age in which we live in. So education then must empower the individual to develop those spiritual qualities and attitudes. On a societal level, this purpose, this twofold moral purpose, is expressed through striving to promote the welfare of the human race and to transform the structures of society. For example, while believing in equality and very sincerely that men and women are equal is important, this belief alone does not change the way society is organized within the family, within the workforce, and in the many other places in which women are discriminated against. Simply knowing or believing in your heart that men and women are equal is insufficient. One must also arise to begin to change the structures and processes of society. In this way, then, individual and social transformation must go hand in hand. So maybe we could explore this idea a little bit more, this idea that our development as an individual is inseparable to the development and movement of society. Because if we focus in education on one aspect of our twofold moral purpose at the expense of the other, there are consequences for both the individual and for society. For example, if we focus solely on the self, what tends to happen is that our perspective narrows. And it also impedes the growth of our qualities, because those qualities can only be manifested and developed in a social context. It's really difficult to actually develop our talents and our virtues in isolation from society and in isolation from one another. Could you imagine how difficult it would be to develop the quality of love by just kind of being locked up in your room or not having much interaction with anybody? It's only when you fight the battles of love that we get a glimpse into the name of God as the all-loving. Similarly, you learn to forgive when you struggle to forgive someone. And there you gain insight into the name of God as the all-forgiving. At the same time, ignoring the development of the self, the individual, and focusing only on the transformation of society, with little or no attention to personal growth, can cause the individual to lose compassion and respect for others. It could also cause individuals to become prone to acts of cruelty and oppression, which we've seen in history around various social movements that are really seeking to change the society and seeing that as actually the chief culprit of all of their problems. So instead, these aspects of our twofold moral purpose, the social and the individual, are inseparable. The standards and behaviors of individuals shape the environment, and in turn, individuals are molded by social structures and processes. So a fundamental concern for education must be to cultivate a young person's twofold sense of purpose, so that their energies are directed to personal growth and social transformation. So I'd like to pause here and maybe just look a little bit at the kinds of educational approaches that are prevalent today, that perhaps do not take into consideration the cultivation of our twofold moral purpose. It seems today that educational processes seem to be organized around certain concepts related to self-realization, self-discovery, self-love, self-esteem. And this is reflective of a worldview that's individualistic at its core. But at the same time, the problem is complex, because our world does deprive human beings of the strength they need to lead purposeful lives. It does crush people's true identity. It does make multitudes oblivious of the life of the soul. And in this way, in this type of environment, discovering one's true potential does deserve some attention. But programs that emphasize the self do not necessarily remedy the situation. What frequently tends to happen is that in the name of self-realization and self-discovery, such programs romanticize the individual and can bolster the ego. Our challenge in education is to nurture spiritual susceptibilities in the young, that their tender hearts may be stirred by attraction to the most great beauty and turn towards the high ideals of selfless service to humanity. Thus, tending to the educational needs of young people must prevent the insistent self from asserting itself. Another significant idea shaping our efforts in education is the need to nurture understanding, the lack of which is a major cause of superficiality in education today. The most basic concern of any educational endeavor has to be the development of this gift, for knowledge alone is insufficient. Because it's possible to know a great deal but not be capable of doing something about it, and it's also possible to believe in something very sincerely, but act in ways that are contrary to that belief. To be fruitful, knowledge must be accompanied by true understanding. Baha'u'llah says, "The favors vouchsafed by him unto mankind have been, and will ever remain limitless in their range. First and foremost among these favors, which the Almighty hath conferred upon man, is the gift of understanding. His purpose in conferring such a gift is none other except to enable his creature to know and recognize the one true God. Exalted be his glory. This gift giveth man the power to discern the truth in all things, leadeth him to that which is right, and helpeth him to discover the secrets of creation." So this faculty of understanding enables us to identify truth, to know what knowledge is true and what is false, for Baha'u'llah tells us that some knowledge is divine and some satanic. It enables us to know what leads to loftiness or lowliness, glory or abasement, what assists us in our spiritual journey, and what returns to dust. Understanding involves mediation between the universal and the particular, when you apply knowledge to a particular situation. It is incumbent upon every man of insight and understanding, our writings tell us, to strive to translate that which hath been written into reality and action. Abdu'l-Baha, in his address to the Central Organization for a Durable Peace in The Hague, observed that for peace to be realized in the world, it was not adequate that people should be informed about the horrors of war. He said, "Today, the benefits of universal peace are recognized amongst the people, and likewise, the harmful effects of war are clear and manifest to all. But in this matter, knowledge alone is far from sufficient. A power of implementation is needed to establish it throughout the world." Education, then, has to go so much further than merely informing young people of the ills of the world. We may know that war is bad, peace is good, but in the struggle to work with others to achieve peace, you are forced to face the challenges of your own character, to struggle against them, and to take a step towards being a promoter of well-being and tranquility. And in that process, you gain understanding. Most importantly, understanding of your true self. From this, one could say that developing our understanding, fostering our spiritual qualities, are to be developed in the context of service to humanity. Moral empowerment needs to be associated with progressively more effective and complex acts of service to the community and, by extension, to the whole of humanity. When this is achieved, the consciousness of the oneness of humankind, always in danger of being a mere abstraction, is given concrete shape through the notion of service. Committing oneself to the common good defines a radically different identity, an identity that the consciousness of the oneness of humankind nurtures. It is an identity founded on an understanding of our true selves. Because, as you know, service impels individuals to come face to face with the collective side of our identity. Walking in the path of service in the company of others unites the fulfillment of individual potential and the advancement of our communities. It unites being with doing. And at the most fundamental level, it is a requirement of what it is to be human. That one indeed is a man who today dedicateth himself to the service of the entire human race. So far we've said that education requires a clear and explicit purpose, a sense of purpose that can empower individuals and motivate individuals to tend to their own personal growth and transformation, as well as to equip them with the capabilities and capacities required to contribute to the betterment of society. To do this, we know and we are conscious that education cannot necessarily bolster the ego, but nurture spiritual susceptibilities in the hearts of the young, and that involves true understanding versus the assimilation of information and facts only. And that such a process, such a movement of individual and social transformation can really be conceptualized and seen along a path of service to humanity and service to others. So I'd like to maybe conclude with some experiences related to some of these ideas that we've explored this morning, with one program that I'm sure we're all familiar with and from which I can draw examples from, which is the Junior Youth Spiritual Empowerment Program. The Junior Youth Program, alongside the sequence of courses and classes for children, are a part of an educational process that is developing within its students the requisite capacities to build communities founded on spiritual principles. They are, as the House notes, programs of education transformative in their effects and encompassing both the material and spiritual aspects of life. Far from producing passive subjects focused on learning how to function in the world as it is today, Baha'i-inspired education enhances those very capabilities that we can draw on for peace building. This work has generated many questions that the friends all across North America are approaching with a posture of learning. They have many, many questions that they're thinking about. How do we act, for example, with dispassionate justice and build peace in an unjust world where violence is increasingly the norm? How do we protect ourselves from falling into adversarial methods to achieve noble aims? What types of thoughts and behavior can bring about an end to a vicious cycle of violence? What qualities and attitudes are we asked to manifest in the face of prejudice and hostility? What does a positive response to violence look like? How do we resist the tendency to adopt patterns of thought and modes of expression that create an us and a them? What capacities and capabilities do we need to help transform a social environment plagued by disunity to one characterized by unity? Much of what is carried out in the name of justice today, while adept at identifying the wrongs committed by various individuals and institutions, they may not create the conditions needed for healing, peace, and reconciliation. For example, in the best of cases, schools can train students to be critical thinkers, to question authority, and to identify unjust practices. And while it is necessary to be able to identify injustices, we also need to foster the capacity to forgive, to see beyond intractable divisions between us, and to forge bonds of unity and fellowship across barriers. In contrast, the animator of a junior youth group is striving to create an environment of love, of respect and support. And in that context, in that kind of an environment, the program helps participants gain a knowledge of their true selves and find answers to their searching questions. In the group, their true identity, their spiritual identity is fostered, and the materials of the program that they study introduces them to those concepts that form a sound moral structure in the hearts and minds of young people. I'd like to conclude with two stories that demonstrate the power of the human spirit to overcome adversity, that transform feelings of sorrow to purposeful action, and that demonstrate the potential of young people that through their thoughts, words, and deeds are striving to foster and create peaceful and harmonious communities. So the first is from the Atlantic region in the United States, and it was shared to me by the coordinator of the junior youth program there. So there was a girl in their junior youth program that had a very difficult life. Her name was Maya. Her father had been shot to death a few years ago down the street from where she had lived. Her mother had told the animators that Maya's grandmother had showed the police photos of her father's body against her wishes, and this had really affected her. Maya had a difficult time with her anger. She would become nearly hysterical any time she interacted with any of the boys in her group. They would always antagonize her because they knew that they would get a bit of an explosive reaction out of her. So in the group, she very much refused to read, especially in front of others, because of this interaction that she had. She wasn't in the junior youth group of the coordinator himself, but he had a chance to work with her one-on-one one day at one of the neighborhood junior youth camps they were holding, because it was just so difficult for her to read in the presence of others. So one-on-one together at the camp, every time she tried to read and didn't know a word, she would just apologize. She would say, I'm sorry. And the coordinator told her, you don't have anything to be sorry about. Just slow down. I don't want you to apologize. I love reading with you, and we can go at your pace. So he taught her to sound out the words instead of trying to sight read, which is to kind of look at the word and kind of guess what the word actually is. And actually within a few lessons and over time, she became quite proficient at reading, even though she still needed help with comprehension. She told him that I don't like men, and I've never liked being around men, but you're different. A few weeks later, the coordinator joined the two animators, and they visited Maya and her mom. They talked about how much they loved having her in the group, but that she had to learn to control her anger. They talked to her about opposing thoughts of war with thoughts of peace, and talked with her about practical things that she can do when the kids antagonized her. She said that it was really hard, that when the kids called her names, or when they hit her, or spit at her on the bus, it was difficult. The animators said they couldn't imagine how hard it must be for her in the hallways at school or on the bus, but that they would protect her in the group, and that she would always be able to come to them. And she did. She started walking away from confrontation and spent more and more time with the animators whenever she felt upset. Whereas before, her anger would make her inaccessible to people, she would now let the animators comfort her and talk to her whenever she became upset. At the end of the summer, this group of friends, they were invited to meet with the chancellor of a university that was just down the street from where she had lived. She'd never been on that campus before, even though she had lived so close. She even asked the coordinator, who is it that we're going to meet? Is he like the principal? Is he in charge of the school? And they said, yes, chancellor's a little bit like the principal. When they met with the chancellor, he said very encouraging things to them and about the junior youth program. He appreciated that the young people in the neighborhood, surrounding neighborhood, were being taught spiritual and moral education. He said that this is what was missing in the world today. And so he asked the junior youth, how has the program been helping them? And Maya spoke up. She said it had really helped her with her reading and with her anger, that I wasn't able to read before, and I would get angry around other young people. But being with my animators and talking to them helped me control my anger. The chancellor was so happy to see that the animators from his school were serving the younger generation in this way. He told them that this is what the university was originally built for. When they left, Maya turned to her animators and said, "I would like to try to come here one day." The last story I wanted to share is from the Northwest region of the United States also, and it's also about a junior youth group. So a member of this one particular junior youth group that was from a distant part of the cluster had lost her home to a major house fire that had started suddenly in the middle of the night. While she and her special needs brother and mother were able to escape, the brother miraculously through the help of a neighbor, her father and younger sister had died in the fire. The family, the Baha'i family in the neighborhood, whose daughter had helped form the junior youth group, were pillars of support for this family and the grieving community. When the coordinator came to visit and to support this junior youth group, the daughter had related that just the week before, the group had been studying a section from the junior youth text, Glimmerings of Hope, and that she had immediately called to mind the idea that hope and a positive attitude was essential for ongoing difficulties. She took the opportunity to visit her friend, to comfort her, to cheer her. She began consulting with her parents and the animators about how the group could carry out service projects to support this family. And what the group decided to do was to host a devotional gathering for the community. So they decided to contact a chapel that was on the same block to be able to host the gathering. So the following that I'll end with is excerpts from a letter that was circulated by the gentleman who had opened the chapel for this group's use for the devotional gathering. So he says, "Dear fellow board members, we had a request from some people who live on 6th Avenue to open the chapel up on Wednesday evening so that they could gather together and reflect on the tragedy that had happened to their neighbors. I said by all means yes. I went and opened the doors at 7:20 as they wanted to gather at 7:30. I did not think many people would show up. It wasn't advertised or mentioned anywhere that I knew of. It was sort of impromptu. But within 5 minutes, the chapel had about 30 people in it, as far as I knew. Mostly adults, but a few children. My plan was to let them have their piece, and then I would come back at 8:30 to lock up. They all sat down, scattered about, and sat in silence. I went downstairs to use the restroom before I left, and as I came back up, someone was speaking. Not to anyone in particular, just sort of praying out loud. I was so moved by what was being said, I decided to stay. It was probably the most moving and emotional time I have ever had in my life. These were the neighbors on 6th Avenue who wanted to share their grief together. The children were all friends of Kate, and most were in a group they all belonged to. There was mostly silence. Everyone once in a while, someone would say something about Katie or June and hope the best for their life journey. The young girls twice sang, just out of nowhere. It was absolutely beautiful. There are 2 reasons why I'm writing this. The first is to share my experience to what the chapel provided and how it is truly a center for the community. It very much felt that way last night. What I witnessed was so profound, so moving. I would not trade that hour for anything else. I too have grieved about the loss we have experienced, and having sat with these people, neighbors, and the community, it helped me in dealing with it. My second reason for sharing my story is because they're going to do it again on Friday at 7, and I encourage everyone to attend. If you are experiencing the grief that most of us islanders are, this will help and also give you new insight to what this community is all about. I promise you, it will change your life. Thank you.